What is up, everybody? Thanks for being here. This is the Coast to Coast podcast from InsideCarolina.com. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Thanks for being a part of the show. We appreciate you being here. Appreciate you subscribing. If you have not subscribed, go ahead and remedy that now. Fix it for me. Hammer that subscribe button. We hope that you appreciate all the content that Inside Carolina deals out to you, and we appreciate you listening to us. I know I say appreciate a lot, but I really do. I think we like our listeners, we like our viewers, we like the folks that makes this community what it is. And when things suck, you need people to lean on. And that's why we're glad you guys are here. And I've got two guys here that we can lean on right now. Sean Moran and Sherrell McMillan. Sean, how are you, dude? Don't
Uh,
laugh. Say something positive.
my son is currently asleep,
There
so
you
I'm
go.
I'm happy about that.
Big wins, big wins. I told the guys before we started the show tonight that I'm madder than Devil's house cat right now. So I'm hoping that somebody can pick me up a little bit. Sherrell, how you living, dude?
My daughters are asleep, so I'm doing well also.
Man, well, hopefully my two will be visiting the Sandman relatively soon. And something else that visited the Sandman today, likely North Carolina's postseason hopes, as they lost on the road at NC State, 77-69. The Tar Heels, we've been talking about the lack of consistency all season, and I think today what we saw was they have a consistent recipe they like to play in games like this. They have a lead in the second half, sometimes in the late first half. They never have a chance to extend it. And then all of a sudden things go away really quickly. And when adversity comes, the team kind of caves a little bit. And what we saw today, Tar Heels led 54-48. And then blink of an eye, they had four straight possessions. I think four straight possessions where they did nothing. NC State scored 7 or 9 in a row, and that was all she wrote. I'll give you guys some quick stats before we dive into your analysis and thoughts you have on the game. North Carolina out rebounded NC State 48-34, including an 18-10 offensive rebound advantage. They did not pass the ball very well today. Again, 7 assists. That makes 13 combined for the last two games. Did not do very well on defense, only forcing 3 turnovers from NC State, and I think only one of those was forced. Just a really, really sideways game. The Tar Heels did shoot a little better from beyond the arc, but allowed NC State to shoot 45% from the field while only shooting 35 themselves. And Sherrell, it's weird. I'm sitting here looking at the stats, man. The box score, I got North Carolina shooting 24 free throws to NC State's 10, but I thought that was like a big deal. I thought that was like, get your torches and pitchforks if North Carolina shoots that many free throws. It's weird. I don't hear anybody complaining about that today. How does that work?
I guess it only works when the other team loses.
Oh, okay. I got you. I see what you're talking about now. Fellas, I want to come to you first, Sean. What did you see today from the Tar Heels that you feel like, I guess, kind of doomed them? While it may have been more of the same, did you see anything new today that was just something they could not rebound from?
Well, I think in the first half, I know we'll focus on the second half, and especially when they went up six and you had a quiet crowd and NC State teetering, and they just were given the knockout punch to deliver and just couldn't do it. But even in the first half, from offensive perspective, it was pretty sluggish. First possession was a turnover, and it just goes, I think, in general, to the lack of attention, lack of detail that the team has shown throughout the year. In the first half, it was under 1 point per possession in terms of offensively, and that being said, they're still only down one, and then starting the second half, started to pick it up offensively, but they were still giving up some offensive rebounds, some sloppy play that let NC State really stay in it a little bit longer than they should, even before getting up to 6 points. And I think we've seen it, we've talked about it for the majority of time. If you're not taking advantage of those lulls when the team can't score and they're not playing, they're not jacked up to beat UNC. If you're not extending that lead like they did in Notre Dame at home or Clemson at home, you're going to be in trouble when they do start hitting a few shots and the ball starts rolling. So it was, it was definitely frustrating to watch. You kind of know how it's going to play out when they don't take advantage of those situations. And unfortunately, we saw it again today, and was rewatching that final 10 minutes before we came back on, which was painful enough. But they get down 7, and it's around the same time they're up 7 early in the year against Iowa State. And in that, you're almost thinking, how are they going to let this game go? And of course, Iowa State hits a 3. They get the momentum. here it's just the wheels are off the tracks and you can't get them back on. So really frustrating just how this week went and how the team played. I think two of the worst offensive and defensive performances they've had in ACC play.
Sherrell, we've talked about it before, and I should have predicated the show, I'm sorry, from the top and saying we're not going to spend time today trying to figure out why. I think we've talked about that multiple times on this show. And I think it's obvious that nobody has answers why, because the Tar Heels still keep doing the same fatal mistakes and losing games in the same way. So I will go ahead and tell everybody that's listening, we're not going to kind of belabor the point of why today, because I don't know that that's helpful, nor do we have any answers. That said, Sherrell, it seemed, like Sean said, it seemed to kind of follow a script where the guys had a couple of good things go for them. And then the second that something doesn't go, it just, they lose control, they lose their minds. Have you seen anything before in your years of watching Carolina basketball that is as predictable negatively as this current, I guess, formula seems to be?
No, just bad teams, losing games pretty much is the only other thing I can think of that is this bad. And it's magnified because, as we've talked about ad nauseum over the last year, is that this is the most experienced starting five that UNC has ever had. Kim Palm has a feature where it breaks it down into quarters as opposed to halves. And I would urge anyone with a subscription to just go look at UNC's scores in what is the fourth quarter of the game in those losses. It's not great, and it's really surprising considering, the veteran presence that they have on the team. It was funny. Sean mentioned the Iowa State game, and I'm just a glutton for punishment right now. But as Iowa State was hitting those threes, UNC had a field goal go wide left in overtime. So it kind of brings you full circle all the way back to that mind-numbing game. Brings you all the way back. So it's been a rough few months for this UNC basketball team.
This episode of the Coast to Coast podcast is brought to you by drinking bleach. Sorry, go ahead. That's just where you just took me. That's painful, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, there's really no rhyme or reason other than, that it's hard to trust them when they get a lead. Sean has talked about all season how the 8 and 10 point leads with a let's say a good Carolina team or a better than average Carolina team, those leads are usually 16 and 18. So when the team does go on their inevitable run, Carolina still has a 4 point lead or a 6 point lead as opposed to being down by 4 or being down by 6. So that's a huge deal. It's surprising too, because if you look at the two NC State games today, Terquavian Smith didn't hurt them that much. I mean, Leaky did I don't want to overstate it and say amazing, but a really good job defensively. I think in the two games, Smith is like 10 of 27 or 10 of 28 from the field. So they took out their best player. And it's like it still didn't work. And I don't know, man. Like everybody else, there's not a lot of answers here. We'll get accused of giving kind of shallow commentary, but what else is there? I mean, there's Hubert Davis can't give you an answer about what's going on. Yeah. Armando Bacot can't give you an answer about what's going on. So you just look at the games, and poor shooting and bad play down the stretch are what plagued this team, this entire season.
Well, I think the low-hanging fruit that a lot of folks will say is these guys don't care and blah blah blah, and that's fine. You can say those things, but there's nothing that you can use to prove that, I guess, is what we're getting at, right?
And let me go there too, Joey. I think that is maybe the most frustrating thing for the fan base at large, is that there have been previous teams where you could say, man, if they just played a little bit harder, if they just dove on the ground a couple of times more, but with this team, I don't think it's an effort thing. I know other people have said that. I disagree. They are playing hard. It's just when it comes down to it, they're just not good enough right now. And that's hard to accept for a lot of people, because usually in the absence of, well, they're not doing this schematic thing or this X and O thing right, it always comes back to, or just more grit and more effort and more want to. They have all that. They're just not good enough. And that's hard for people to accept.
I mean, I just one thing on that, and I do feel in terms of them playing hard, and I was on the message boards about when do they quit, and I think it was obviously in the last few minutes once the floodgates were open, they weren't coming back from that, but I think they played pretty hard throughout. I think we have seen that happen many times before, not just in the Hubert era, but also in the Roy Williams era. You can go back to the Georgetown game and what was it, 2007 in the Elite Eight, once that ball went rolling downhill. But one thing, whether it's basketball IQ or awareness, which I think goes to transition play. They did have, two very nice breaks early in the first half that resulted in dunks, but there are a handful of others where when they're making the nice pass, it's almost even that those are coming a second too late. So when they're not as open and you're losing that second, I just felt that there are a lot of transition opportunities early on. In the second half, it was the second possession with Caleb Love where he passed it to Puff, but that should have been a layup.
Yeah.
Also, Armando missed Puff cutting down, didn't pass it, and just those simple things of hey, those could be easy 2 points with just I think some better situational awareness and better just passing ability and looking for teammates.
And the team did do things differently today. They did try to push transition a little more in the first half. They were a little more effective, like Sherrell said, defending and taking away NC State's number one option, but just still can't quite put it all together and can't get consecutive good possessions. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about not being able to get more than about a 6 or 7 point lead. When they do, they give it right back, or they can't seem to stretch it from 6 and 7 to 10 to 12. Sherrell, one of the things that I think a lot of folks have been mystified with is the continued lack of use of the bench. And in accordance with what he said Friday in his media availability, Hubert Davis did use the bench a little differently today. You saw Puff Johnson get 22 minutes, the same as Pete Nance, and you saw Puff come in a little earlier. You saw the bench come in a little earlier than usual. And then the second half rolls around. North Carolina starts the second half down one. And you see, I don't know that he used anybody in the second half other than Puff Johnson. Jalen Washington played 0 minutes today. I said on Inside Carolina Live on Saturday that I feel like, for the future, he should be playing a minimum of 20 minutes a game as long as his body can handle it. Question I asked you, Sherrell, is why at this point is the staff not using the bench more? And I know we're not trying to figure out why this team isn't playing better. I know I said that a second ago, but why is the staff not using the bench more? What is it that Hubert Davis is not seeing from these guys, or what is it that he's afraid of that is just keeping him from pulling that trigger?
Well, again, all the caveats necessary. We're not in practice. We don't see them, as much as the coaching staff does and all that stuff. But I would say, I think Hubert Davis, much like his players, when things get tight, maybe they kind of go back to what they know. And what he's known as a head coach so far through basically 2 seasons is, play his guys, play his starters until they can't play anymore. That's what he did all of last year. And I think when things get tight, you go back to what's comfortable, and that's what's comfortable to him. So I think that's part of it. And that's one of the reasons that you have to, when you hire an inexperienced coach, he's got to grow too. And again, I'm not making excuses for him, so please don't take it as that. But that's just the reality of the situation, is that he's still new to this. And the hope is, I think, moving forward, that in year 3 and in year 4, that he learns from what happened in year 1 and year 2 and uses the offseason to kind of tweak those things. So I think really that's what it comes down to, is comfort and trust. We always talk about how trust is the currency in which coaches, operate. Now, whether or not that trust should be there, I think is another question for another day. But just explaining kind of why they do it, I think that's what it is. I mean, RJ Davis played all 40 minutes, if I'm correct, and he didn't have his best game of the season. So, but he has more trust from Hubert Davis than the other guard option. So I think it's as simple as that. Whether I'm not assigning value to that, just explaining why I think they're doing what they're doing.
Sean, did you see anything today from Puff Johnson or what limited minutes we saw from Tyler Nickel that made you feel like maybe those guys could earn some more time in the next couple of weeks, or is at this point, mail it until next year?
Yeah, it's almost like the video game approach, where if you're playing video games, you don't want to sub anybody out. You just want to let them go until they need to recharge. And I feel that's how UNC is in the second half, where you're just going to ride the starters no matter if they're not hitting or they're hitting. Tyler Nickel, I like to see him get in early. He didn't get any shot attempts and didn't, I'd say, impact the game. But once again, I do like how he plays from a basketball IQ perspective and moving the ball. Seth Trimble seemed to get more time, but he finally went to his patented pull-up jumper, but once again, I think he is just thinking too much, and he's a step slower than what he can be, and I think that is impacting. And then you saw being short on the 3-pointer as well at the end of the first half. Puff, I think is really the only one that Coach Davis has confidence in. I thought he came in and played well. There were a few times where it looked like he wasn't exactly sure on the play or where to be in the first half, and that caused I think they scored on one of them, but that did cause them to slow up on those possessions. So that's a little concerning at this point in time, that you're not everybody's not in sync and operating as quickly and efficiently as possible. But he makes things happen. He's not perfect, but I do like him, and he does make things happen. And he has been a little more productive than Pete Nance. So would continue to like to see him get minutes, especially for next year. I think we're all hoping that we could have seen that the Puff we saw in the championship game last year, not as everyday occurrence, but almost to that level as he was growing. And then Jalen Washington, didn't play. I think we all saw what he was capable of in UVA. Obviously, has some defensive issues and strength issues to work through, but he needs playing time, I think, for next year, and he offers that wingspan that maybe that could have been, been a little bit more of a deterrent on DJ Burns, even though he's going to back him down. At least he has to deal with that longer wingspan versus what we're seeing today.
Joey, I wanted to add too. I think you start to see it hurt Carolina defensively with the guards playing so many minutes. I mean, part of it is the guards are playing poor defense. That's certainly part of it. But you always wonder, like, are they playing so poorly defensively because they know they're going to have to play 38, 39 minutes and carry the load offensively? Or is it just they're bad defenders, or is it a combination of the two? It's more than likely a combination of the two. But I mean, how many times have guards torched UNC this season, like Joyner did today? I mean, it was just I don't want to say use that word. It was hard to watch, the pick and roll coverage, and we'll let Adrian and Trevor get more into the details on that. But it was not good, and State was getting, for a stretch there, anything they wanted. Pull up jump shots, just wide open, easy step in jump shots that you can't let guys who are good shooters get into rhythm like that, because it'll come back and bite you. And that's what happened with Joyner. So I guess it's a chicken egg thing. Is it 38 minutes causing poor defense, or are they poor defenders and playing 38 minutes exacerbates it, or is it a combination? And I don't have the answer to that, but it's pretty clear that that's an issue.
Well, I can tell you that, there aren't many college players that play better defense on the back end of 35 plus minutes in a college game. Just that physically, I don't know that happens very often. Guys, before we take a quick break, I want you to give our listeners something positive. Sherrell, what's something positive our listeners can look for in the remaining regular season games for this Tar Heel squad? How you like that? How you like that grenade dropped into your lap, huh?
I see Vin Diesel on TV right now, and I want to say something to you because I know how you feel about that, but I'm going to stop. Something positive. Leaky Black has played really well the last 2 games. And you start to see that a lot with guys whose eligibility is going to be exhausted. You can't really say seniors anymore, but you see them, as their senior year or final year starts to end, you see them start to pick it up. I won't give away the stat, but he was so close to a stat I've been tracking for 5 years now. Today, he didn't quite get it, real close, but defensively, he was dynamite on Terquavian Smith. I thought he was more aggressive passing the ball than he's been. If you look at Adrian's numbers, that's one thing that has definitely hurt UNC, is that he hasn't been as good of a facilitator as he was last year. And he hit a 3, I think. So he's playing well, all things considered. So that's something positive.
Sean, same question.
Positive is it would be nice if it was a home game coming up, but they've got four games left in ACC play. I think 2 weeks ago we tried to predict their record, but you can look at all 4 of those games, and there's not one game you're going to say, oh well, they're definitely going to win. But at the same time, if they can take care of Notre Dame and Florida State, as tough as that sounds on the road, they do have home games against UVA and Duke, and I think perhaps that could change the narrative somewhat. It'd be nice if they did not have to win the ACC tournament to get in. It's probably shaping up like that, which in itself is extremely disappointing. But Notre Dame, they lost there last year. It really poor defense watching them try to guard Notre Dame, but at the same time now Notre Dame bottom 200s in defense. So UNC should be able to get shots that they want. Can they hit them is another question. Armando should have his way down low, and they should be able to penetrate. But once again, it's going to come down to mental toughness and playing on the road. And I think, the Miami loss is one thing. Losing to NC State is another. And, you'll be able to see if they've thrown in the towel, I think, going through that game, or if they're still ready to play and ready to fight. And hopefully, if you get one win, that gives you confidence. Basketball, especially in college, is a huge game of confidence. So, I think it's nice that they're playing Notre Dame versus, going at UVA or at Virginia Tech again. So we'll see what happens. But it's definitely been a frustrating last 3 to 4 weeks, not to mention the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, losing 5 out of 6. Go ahead, Sherrell.
I was going to ask Sean a question. So Nate Laszewski on Wednesday night, over or under 22.5 points?
Over.
I mean, he obviously has killed UNC over the years, but I'm going to go under on this one.
I feel like he plays better at home. I know he didn't do a lot when they played North Carolina earlier this season, but
he's probably due.
He's probably due, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm also not in the most even keel of minds right now about this squad. I lied. I do want to ask one more question before we hit a break. Sherrell, you mentioned earlier a lot of folks probably want us to just rip into the coaching staff. I don't think any of us see that as being productive, but there are things that this coaching staff, seem to be kind of grasping at straws right now. I heard a coach today post game that seemed like he might be out of answers with this squad. And in late February, when things aren't changing, it would kind of seem that he is indeed out of answers. We're not going to go rip on coaches because it's not, I don't know that it gives any insight. It doesn't give any analysis. It might just make people feel better. But I want to get your kind of assessment as to where this coaching staff is and where they might be able to go with whatever's left of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who can say they've done a good job this year. There are various reasons for that. But frankly, it stops with the head coach. The head coach has to find a way to put his players in the best position to succeed. And I don't know that that's always happened this season. They've tried, but it hasn't always happened. And then we talk about kind of doing the same thing over and over again and getting, poor results. That's not the definition of insanity, but it is not something that you need to do when something's not working and it hasn't worked for, 15 games, 20 games, then try something else. And I think that's part of the frustration that I see from the fan base, is to kind of seeing a stubbornness and maybe an unearned stubbornness. I think I'm putting the unearned in like quotations for those who are listening. I think a lot of the fan base feels like that he hasn't earned the right to kind of say, this is what I'm doing and this is what we're doing. So I think that's part of it. So there's a lot of blame that goes on the coaching staff. But as I said before, previous podcasts, I think this is a collective failure. The coaching staff has not been great. Hubert Davis has not been great. The players, outside of really Armando Bacot for a good stretch and RJ Davis for a stretch, have not been great. They're making mistakes that you see when they were freshmen, making kind of the same thing. So there hasn't been that growth. There wasn't growth individually from the off season. So I think it's a little bit of everything that's caused this kind of system failure for UNC. But the coaches definitely shoulder blame. I don't want anyone to think that they don't. As far as what's left, I'm kind of with you. I see I don't want to take anyone else's hope away. If you think they're going to go on this just massive heater where they win 4 straight in the regular season and 4 straight in Greensboro and 6 straight in March, then, bless you. Good for you.
Man,
that's awesome.
Past that ish.
Yeah, but I just don't see it happening. So I think you'll see kind of the same thing these last 4 regular season games, and they're just going to have to hope. And as we said before, hope isn't a strategy, but that's kind of where they are right now. If you look at the post games the last couple of weeks, everybody just seems like they're at a loss to explain this. So I think it's just a hope and a prayer at this point.
Man, I went to church today too. That's hoping and praying's I'm not even sure that's even reaching. I think God might have checked out on this squad. All right. Um before we totally let the national guys pay some bills, I would be remiss if I didn't bring everybody's attention to positivity. Sherrell, you know what always makes you feel better? New gear.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Sherrell, new gear always makes Sherrell feel better. For Sean right now, it's probably new gear for a kid that doesn't have spit up all over it. Either of those things can be found from our friends at Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com, East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Baseball started this week. The Tar Heels did not do so well in their opener, but did take 2 of 3 to take the series against Seton Hall. I share this because it's baseball season. You're going to be going to the Bosch. Stop by Johnny T-Shirt, get you some baseball gear, get you a new baseball cap. I don't know if you guys have picked this up about me, but I'm a fitted cap guy. And I will be making my springtime stop in Johnny T-Shirt before a baseball game here very soon. So hit up Johnny T-Shirt. Even if the results on the basketball court are not what you want them to be, the results in Johnny T-Shirt's inventory will be far more excessive than even your wildest dreams will be. As Sherrell continues to look at Dom, we will take a second and allow the national guys come in here and run some ads. Be right back, talk a little bit of recruiting, and maybe, I don't know, liven things up a little bit. Coast to Coast Podcast on InsideCarolina.com. All right, thanks for sticking around. Coast to Coast Podcast coming at you. I'm Joey Powell. Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan with me as always. Appreciate him being here. Sean, I want you to give some folks some data from Basketball Without Borders that is taking place this weekend in conjunction with the NBA All-Star Game, because from what you told me, you saw some things about Elliot Cadeau, a commitment from the 24 class, that made you happy. Let's hear about it.
Unfortunately, it's been since 2020 in Chicago since I've been able to actually go to a Basketball Without Borders. But what it is, the NBA will bring in some of the top international prospects, usually ones that they have in their global academies or other ones in the U.S. that qualify, and get them together over All-Star Weekend. Testing, scrimmages. It allows all the GMs and scouts that are at All-Star Weekend to come by and watch players that will be drafted really over the next 1 to 3 years. In 2020, Josh Giddey was one of the top players in attendance. So usually there's a handful of top players. Elliot Cadeau, since he's been playing for the Sweden national team, has the Swedish passport, was considered international, and was at the event. So I can't speak to exactly how he played in the scrimmages. I know he got selected for the All-Star team, but it's kind of like the Pac-12 in terms of a lot of players getting that selection. But in terms of some measurements, so they similar to the NBA Combine or G League Combine, Elliot Cadeau had a 10.31 lane agility score. I went back on the NBA Combine website, and they have data from really 2001 all the way through. And that score at an NBA Combine would put him in the top 10. And it's pretty interesting to see some of those guys that have been in there. It's been a mix of guards and bigs, but basically it shows your agility and how quickly you're moving. So I think Pro Insight had a tweet showing, and it's pretty pretty fascinating to see how fast his feet were moving in that. But 10.31, that would put him top 10 all time in the NBA Combine. And then from a max vertical, I'm always a little skeptical on those numbers, just in terms of like you can always, I think, game it a little bit with your standing reach and things of that nature. But he registered 41 and a half max vertical, which was highest at the event. Once again, looking at all NBA Combine, it's not putting him in the top 10, but it would usually put him, ranked number 1 or 2 each year. Kennedy Chandler last year was the top in the NBA Combine at 41 and a half. So I think that shows some of that explosion you're seeing in the dunks, but also from a foot speed perspective, defensively, what he can do. From a height, weight, and wingspan, there's nothing to write home about, which for UNC fans could be positive. 6 foot and a quarter with shoes, 6'2" wingspan. So he's not one of those super lanky athletes that the NBA is drooling over the measurements. So that one could be one positive in terms of if he is in school for longer than one season. But those are just two testing results that came out, and when looking at them historically, were pretty impressive.
That foot speed, I don't know that I've ever heard anything that high unless it's Sherrell like running to buy tickets for an Alicia Keys concert. That is absurdly quick. Well, thanks for sharing that, man. I appreciate the breakdown and appreciate you dumbing it down for folks like me that, when you put in perspective of other combine measurements, yeah, that does get your attention. Sherrell, on the recruiting news as well, again, you had a good little nugget in your scoop this past week that you posted on the Inside Carolina Premium Boards about Jaren Stevenson, who is the last major target right now for the Tar Heels in the 24 class, local kid, power forward. You got some news on him, and I think you used the big R word when you were writing that little scoop this past week.
Yeah, it's kind of in recruiting, there's kind of standard questions that you ask people when you first talk to them. Tell us about your game, self-scouting report, all that stuff. And we're gonna have to add, are you going to reclassify, or are you thinking about reclassifying, or have you ever thought about reclassifying at one point in your entire life, to the series of questions? Because even guys that you wouldn't expect are now all talking about, potentially reclassifying. I think part of it is the reasons vary for different people. And so to your point, Joey, Stevenson, kind of the people we've been talking to for a little while have said that, that was out there. But now it's become kind of more on the record. Someone we talked to said basically all options are on the table when it comes to Jaren and staying in 2024, staying in 2023, whatever he decides to do. Personally, think it would be a mistake for him to reclass unless he has a kind of 2-year plan at whatever school he goes to. But obviously that's their decision to make. But when it comes to all of the reclass stuff, there's so many different variables involved with it that it's just hard to know when someone is very serious about it, when someone's considering it, et cetera, et cetera. So Stevenson was at let me say, he was scheduled to be at the NC State games today, visiting NC State. And then he's set to go on an official visit to Missouri, I think, in the next couple of weeks. I think March 4th, actually, the final weekend of the regular season. All throughout the fall, kind of what we were told was that he was going to take official visits to schools he was very interested in during basketball season to see how, how the games were, how the games went, how the campus was, all that good stuff. As far as we know, he's only made it to Georgetown for an official visit, and that was back in the fall. Sandwiched in between all that was, I think, a visit to NC State, a couple of visits to Virginia, and about 7 or 8 visits to UNC. So UNC still, I think, is considered the favorite from a lot of people, but the longer it goes, I think the more questions people have about it. But he's visited UNC a ton. For those who might not know him, his mom played at UNC. He's from Pittsburgh. He goes to Seaforth, which is in its second year. His dad is the coach at Seaforth, and his mom is an assistant coach. So that's kind of where things stand with him, and we'll see what happens. What we've been told by him and his family was that they wanted to make a decision this summer. So we'll see. But what class he's making a decision for, we won't fully know, I guess, for a few months.
Well, thanks for that synopsis, sir. I appreciate you kind of laying all those things out. I think it's helpful for people to understand where players like this are going. And again, while the season's going on, it's hard to kind of get a lot on these guys except for on their official visits. And I think that laying things out and resetting expectations and what you've been able to glean most recently is helpful for folks that listen and watch this show. All right, boys, 2 cents time. Sean, pennies you want to throw in the fountain today before we go home?
Yeah, I think for me, just one of the general frustrations, we were all excited really from the spring and the summer of UNC almost being back. They had a swagger really going into any of the high school tournaments and AAU tournaments. And now it's almost back to where we were a few years ago as of right now, especially given the question marks on next year's team. Obviously, there are some good recruits coming in, but really hope that with a number 1 ranking, they would have been able to kind of stay, not number 1, but stay in that top 10 to 15 throughout the year, especially when some of the teams that you're seeing that are currently ranked in the top 10 and 15, they're not dead, but I think it's not looking good, and the ACC tournament is gonna they might have to win that to get in, which is frustrating because there's only a handful of games where they just haven't been in it, and that goes to the Bama for overtime, to Iowa State, even NC State getting up 6, and then having it fall apart. So we'll see what can happen, but in general, for me, it's kind of the longer frustration of how things have transpired just over the last 12, 10, 11 months. That's all I got.
Sherrell,
Yeah.
I'll ask you for the same donation.
I'll say you don't have to save your preseason number one as I cover. I know a lot of people like to do that. I think
burn that in a fire, please.
Yeah, I know someone's gonna get mad, but if you can't laugh, you can't do anything. So there's that. So Elliot Cadeau is Sean talked about him being at Basketball Without Borders in Salt Lake City. He's leaving Salt Lake City and flying straight to Sweden, where he'll be on the national team competing in World Cup qualifiers. So more good experience for him, international experience playing against grown men that can never hurt. And I think that's about it. We'll see what happens with recruiting moving forward. There's going to be change, so we'll have plenty of time to get into that in the next few weeks. But there's going to be finally, we've been saying it every year for the last 2 years, but and I will say there's been roster turnover the last couple of years. I mean, UNC, even though it doesn't seem like it, they lost 3 people off of the team last year in Anthony Harris, Dawson Garcia, and Current Walton. It doesn't seem like it, but there has been turnover. But I expect a good amount of turnover this offseason between people going elsewhere, people maybe deciding to pursue professional options, and people exhausting eligibility. On that note, the portal opens the day after Selection Sunday, which I believe is March 13th. So that is a key date to look forward to. Like, guys will say they're entering the portal, probably next week or March 5th, not from UNC, just in general. For next week, March 5th, March 8th, but it won't officially open, and coaches won't be able to officially communicate with players until March 13th. So just keep that date kind of in the back of your head.
All righty. Well, again, I'm thankful for you guys. I'm thankful for what you bring to the show. Happy that everyone was able to be a part of the show tonight. Thanks for listening. If you have not lately, make sure you drop us a little review and a rating. If you don't like what we're doing, let us know. We do try to communicate and correspond back and forth with folks that do give us feedback, and we want to make sure we're providing the best kind of podcast you guys want to listen to. But either way, we're glad you were able to download and listen to the show today. Hope that that the morose discussion topics weren't enough to put you to sleep and weren't enough to make anyone sad, but just bringing it to you as we see it, as we always do at Inside Carolina. But for Sean Moran, for Sherrell McMillan, I want to give a shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring and to John Segley for producing. I'm just Joey Powell. Thank you guys for being here. We'll talk to you next time on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com.